4, 3, 2, 1.
Listen up, y'all, cause this is it. The beat that I'm banging is delicious. Tartagalicious definition make them girls go loco. They want my treasures so they get their pleasures from my photo. You can see me, you can't squeeze me. I ain't easy, I ain't sleazy. I got reasons why I tease them. Girls just come and go like Caesar. Tartagalicious, but I ain't promiscuous. And if you unsuspicious, all that shit is fictitious. I blow kisses that puts them girls on rock, and they be lining down the block just to watch what I got. So delicious. It's hot, it's so delicious. I put them girls on rock, it's so delicious. They want a taste of what I got. Tartagalicious. Taste it.
What's up? Ronyon here, and here we are in this point of time that the Childe banner is going up again. For those who have gotten him on his first run, then congratulations! But this video is going to be aimed for beginning and upcoming Childe users. So here is the ultimate Childe guide for beginners. In this video, we are going to talk about Childe style and overview, my Childe build recommendations, team composition and team combo to maximize Childe's burst damage, and the pros and cons of using Childe. Remember, this is only for the beginners of using Childe, so other pointers like the constellations, the combos of Childe with animation cancel, and others will not be tackled in this video. Let's first talk about his normal attack called Cutting Torrent. Childe's normal attack is him shooting 6 consecutive arrows with the bow, dealing physical damage to enemies. His charged attack infuses his arrow with the Hydro element, dealing Hydro damage and marking the enemy with the Riptide debuff. The Riptide debuff deals additional normal attack Hydro damage to an enemy when Childe attacks it. This debuff can also be spread to enemies with its own AoE damage. This debuff lasts for 10 seconds when the never-ending passive is not unlocked. In his normal attack, there are 2 types of Riptide debuff. The first is called Riptide Flash. When Childe deals Hydro damage with a fully charged aim shot to an enemy marked by Riptide, the enemy will be dealt with additional AoE Hydro damage and can occur once every 0.7 seconds. This can also stagger small enemies like Abyss Mages and Hilichurls. The second type of Riptide debuff is called the Riptide Burst. When Childe kills an opponent marked by Riptide, a Hydro Burst is created that spreads the Riptide debuff on the surrounding enemies. Next is his elemental skill called Foul Legacy Raging Tide. This changes Childe's stance from ranged to melee, and all of his attacks will be infused with Hydro. This infusion will not be affected by another elemental infusions, like Bennett's Burst with 6th Constellation unlocked. His normal attack is him performing 6 Hydro strikes with his dagger, and his charged attack is him doing a cross slash dealing elemental skill Hydro damage, and consuming stamina. Also, when Childe switches to his melee stance, he deals a certain amount of Hydro damage in a small radius. When Childe hits an enemy marked by Riptide in his melee stance, Riptide Slash happens, and it deals AoE elemental skill Hydro damage. This occurs once every 1.5 seconds. The cooldown of his skill depends on how long Childe stays in his melee stance and can be from 6 seconds up to 45 seconds at Constellation 0. If Childe unlocks his first constellation, this cooldown decreases by 20%, and at 6th constellation, the cooldown is reset after triggering the burst in melee stance. So whenever Childe finishes attacking the enemies from his melee stance, remember to switch back to his ranged stance by tapping the elemental skill. His elemental burst is called Havoc Obliteration. What happens depends on what stance Childe is in. In his ranged stance, Childe shoots a Hydro-infused arrow that deals up to 605% burst Hydro damage when the talent is on level 8. This will also refund a portion of the energy used in the burst. In his melee stance, Childe slashes his dagger that deals up to 742% burst Hydro damage when the talent is on level 8. After Childe unleashes either of his bursts to an enemy marked by Riptide, Riptide Burst happens. This clears the Riptide status of the enemy and triggers a Hydro explosion that deals AoE burst Hydro damage. Now we have his passives. The first is called Never Ending that increases the Riptide debuff duration from 10 seconds to 18 seconds. The second passive is called the Sword of Torrents that automatically applies the Riptide debuff on the enemy when Childe hits a critical hit. And the last passive is called Master of Weaponry that increases all party members' normal attack level by 1. Personally, I recommend to level up his elemental skill and the elemental burst first before the normal attack. Prioritize leveling up the elemental skill because this is what Childe is gonna be using most of the time. Put the second priority on his elemental burst because it already has a very high damage multiplier, and put the normal attack to the last priority. Now let's talk about Childe's appropriate build, and let's begin with the weapons. I am using the Blackleaf Warbow Refinement Rank 2 and has a crit damage substat. This is my number 1 recommendation for a 4-star weapon because it's free to play and on the Paimon shop every 2 months. It has a high base attack for a 4-star bow, and this is perfect on Domains and Spiral Abyss because of its passive that increases attack percent every enemy killed. For a 5-star weapon, my number 1 recommendation is the Skyward Harp because of its crit rate substat and a passive increase of crit damage by 20% on rank 1. My other recommendation will be the Amos Bow that has an attack percent substat and a passive that increases its normal and charged attack damage by up to 20% on rank 1. For a 4-star weapon other than the Blackleaf Warbow, the Viridescent Hunt is also a great choice because of the crit rate substat. The only thing that draws this back is the fact that it can only be obtained when you purchase the Gnostic Hymn and reach level 30 on the Battle Pass, so it's a very rare weapon. Other than that, if you got lucky on gacha, then either the Stringless that increases elemental skill and burst damage by 24% on rank 1, or Rust that has an attack percent substat and a 40% increase on normal and charge attack on rank 1 are good choices too. If you have neither of those mentioned, then you can forge a prototype crescent weapon on the blacksmith as a good start. This weapon has an attack percent substat and increases attack percent further by 36% on rank 1 when Childe hits a weak spot. If you got Childe in a very early stage in the game, then the Raven Bow, a 3-star weapon, is already a good choice because it increases damage on enemies affected by Hydro, which is Childe's element. Now for the artifact build. There are 2 artifact builds that you can do on Childe. Let's call the first one the main DPS Childe and the second one the flex Childe. The main DPS Childe build requires you to have a 4-piece Heart of Death set, wherein the 2 set increases Hydro damage by 15%, and the 4 set increases the normal and charge attack damage by 30% for 15 seconds after using an elemental skill. The main stats that you want to look for is attack percent on the Sands, Hydro damage bonus for the Goblet, and either crit rate or crit damage on the Circlet depending on what you need. The substats that you want to look for on the artifacts are crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, elemental mastery, and energy recharge. This build will also require you to have an at least 50% crit rate so that Childe will have consistent high damage. This build works because this will increase Childe's ability to be a main damage dealer through its melee stance despite its very high cooldown. The damage on every hit on its melee stance will increase because of the 4 set bonus, and it will be more consistent if Childe has a high crit rate. Now for the Flex Childe build. This is called Flex because this will increase Childe's elemental burst damage. So, this build requires you to have a 2-piece Heart of Death set and a 2-piece Noblesse Oblige set. The 2-set bonus of the Noblesse Oblige will increase Childe's elemental burst damage, hence the name Flex comes to play. The same main stats and substats on the first build are what you want to look for on this build, but I recommend that you have at least 40% crit rate so that you deal massive damage on the enemy easily. This build works because this amplifies Childe's burst damage, which is highlighted on his elemental burst's very high damage multiplier. If you are in a point that you have been getting 3 to 4 star artifacts, then 2-piece Berserkers and 2-piece Gambler sets are what you want to aim for to increase crit rate by 12% and elemental skill damage by 20%. You can also aim for either the Resolution of Sojourner or Braveheart set to increase your attack by 18%. Now let's talk about Childe's best team composition and team combo to maximize his damage. First are the roles that the team needs. The team would need 2 main DPS characters, 1 support and 1 healer, or 2 main DPS characters and 2 supports. This is because of Childe's very long cooldown of his elemental skill, so you will need another main DPS to deal more massive damage for your team. This is very important especially when you have Childe with no constellations. Now for the elemental composition. Childe will work best with a team with supports that have the pyro element. This can trigger a Vaporize reaction that deals massive burst damage. You can do a team with pyro resonance or none, but have at least one pyro member on your team. A good pyro support for Childe is Bennett with any constellations unlocked. If you don't have a viable pyro support, then an electro support like Fischl is a good choice for a consistent electrocharge reaction that deals AoE elemental skill damage. Now let's go to what would be my recommended members to a team with Childe as one of the main DPS. Here we have Childe as a main DPS, Diluc as the main DPS, Bennett as a support, and Sucrose as a support. You can swap Diluc with another pyro main DPS characters like Xinyan, Xiangling, Hu Tao, and others. Bennett must have his burst leveled up as high as you can, and his base attack must be increased as high as you can. This is because the higher the level of the burst and base attack, the higher the attack boost gets. Bennett also must have 4-set Noblesse Oblige bonus applied, so that after using Bennett's burst, attack is increased further. And lastly, you can swap Sucrose with Venti if you have, but I would recommend Sucrose with Mappa Mare and full set Viridescent Veneraire build so that she will increase elemental damage of all your party members and decrease elemental resistance of the enemy to the element infused with the swirl. Now I will explain on how this team will work. Here we have my team aiming to kill this Electro Fatui guy. Take note that Childe in this example has the Flex Childe build. First, we have Childe applying the Riptide debuff on the enemy using his fully charged aim shot. Then Sucrose debuffs the enemy's Hydro resistance using the 4-set Viridescent bonus and buffs all party members' Hydro damage with the Mappa Mare passive. She also triggers her burst, but this is completely optional to infuse the next part, Bennett's attack boosting burst. This will boost the overall attack of all party members within the burst's range, and activating the attack boost from the 4-set Noblesse Oblige bonus as well. And finally, Childe activates his elemental damage from the enemy and triggers his burst, dealing 163,000 critical damage overall with Vaporize. Very important for Childe to deal the most damage is to have the pyro element applied to an enemy, and then Childe must be away from the enemy before activating his melee stance, because his skill already deals hydro damage when tapped. See this example when Childe was very near to the enemy, so it triggered Vaporize too early. Thus, Childe doesn't deal much damage as the previous one. If you haven't caught that, let's take a look at another example with the same team composition, but we are now aiming to kill this poor Pyro Regified here. In this example, Childe is going to get a Hydro damage potion and an Adeptus Temptation buff to maximize its damage further, but this is completely optional. We are going to do the same thing as the previous example. After the Regified is knocked down, it still has the Riptide debuff. So Sucrose debuffs the enemy's Hydro resistance, and then Bennett boosts all of the attacks. Childe steps away to avoid the instant Vaporize to activate his melee stance, goes back and triggers the burst, dealing 200,000 plus damage overall with Vaporize. Here is another example, but this time we are highlighting Childe's melee stance damage. For this team, we swap Sucrose with Venti, but you can still use Sucrose if you want to, and Childe now has the main DPS Childe build. We're going to finish this domain within 15 seconds. In this example, Venti with the full set Viridescent does not debuff the enemies, but rather gathers them into one place using his elemental burst. This is followed by Bennett's burst infusing Venti's burst with Pyro. Childe steps away again as usual to avoid instant Vaporize and then triggers his burst, dealing 120,000 damage with Vaporize. Childe follows it with a series of normal attacks on 3 enemies altogether in one place, killing them quickly. This worked because most of his talent's passives are AoE damage, so the higher the number of enemies that Childe targets, the higher the damage that he can deal. Here is the last example taken from the phase 1 of the Peculiar Wonderland event. This follows the same steps as the previous one, and Childe has the Flex Childe build. Take a look. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of using Childe. Take note that this is completely based on my experience as a Childe main, and I also did a little bit of research for this. The pros of using Childe is that he is an excellent burst damage dealer because of his elemental burst, and when built correctly, he can deal lots of damage with 6 digits. Also a pro of him is that he's a dual wielder. He can switch through a bow and through his hydro daggers, which makes him unique to other 5 stars. Another pro of him is that he's one of the only characters that can debuff enemies using the Riptide debuff, which is useful for the Spiral Abyss when you want to have a Vaporize comp with a Pyro DPS. And with those pros, there are some cons. His very famous con is that his ability to be your team's sole main damage dealer is restricted when you don't have at least his first constellation unlocked. This is because of his very long cooldown of up to 45 seconds after switching back to a ranged stance. The next con is about him being not so effective when it comes to fighting a single target. This is because his talents are mostly AoE damage, and the more enemies Childe targets, the higher the chance he applies the Riptide debuff and spread it across the enemies, dealing more damage. But this problem is solved if you have a crowd controlling character like Venti or Sucrose, so you can gather the enemies in one place and kill them quickly. Also, another con of him is that he does not have a plunge attack on his melee stance, resulting a chance of him being a Hydro Shao being 0%. Overall, at 0 constellations, Childe can easily give you the best amounts of damage when built correctly, and with the correct team composition and combo, this Fatui Harbinger is not going to upset you. That's it for this Childe guide. I hope you enjoyed and learned something. If you did, please leave a big fat thumbs up, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers. If you want to watch my streams, then please follow me on my social media platforms you see on screen and turn on the notification bell so that you won't miss any new uploads. Also, big shout out to Team Kokogo for giving me tips on how to maximize Childe's damage. If you want to learn tips on your favorite characters, then you can send me a DM on any of my social media to apply for the group. That's it guys, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.
いい加減にしてください。